I'm Mahesh Krishnamurthy with BuzzOnEarth, and I have with me another Mahesh. And the interesting coincidence here is that he's Mahesh, I'm Mahesh. We both have names that start with K. And if you say Krishnamurthy fast enough, that can also sound like Kanamuri. So we have to be very careful here in terms of which Mahesh is talking to which one, and we all understand who's talking to who. But having said
The
that,
one with the hair and one without the hair.
the one with controlled hair and the one with the very uncontrolled hair. Yeah. What we need is a Zoom function that has robotic barbers that can reach in and deliver a haircut before they retreat back into the screen. But so the format's going to be very simple. We're going to be essentially having an exchange that we very much intend for it to be useful to all of you, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A for the last 15 to 20 minutes. That's the idea. So with that, let me just get going here. You know, one of the typical sayings, one of the things you hear out there is that you know, if money is the only thing that is stopping you from doing good things in the world, then stop waiting and start doing some good things, right? And I think most, if not all, the people here on this cloud chat with us today have that deep in their hearts. They want to do something good. They want to get going. They don't necessarily want to wait for the money. And I think many of us fall into that category. And if you think about it, you know, you've got hardcore startups which face the typical challenges: cash flow, bootstrapping, financing, attracting investors, developing a strong team, maintaining continuity, developing a purpose, having a story, scaling, growing, generating annuity revenue streams, and so on and so forth. That is your hard-nosed for-profit startup. Then you've got the purely driven from the heart, driven from the tender heart, wanting to do good type of social impact organization where people will jump in whether they have the money or not, because they are driven by the burning desire to do something good. When you blend those two together, my view is that you have the social enterprise, where you're trying to do good and do well, where you want the profit and you want to have a social impact. And I would argue that that is probably one of the toughest challenges in the world for any startup, any entrepreneur to pull off. And in order to be able to do that, there are many challenges and there's a long road to go. And the person who's going to help us navigate through that and help answer some of those questions for us this morning is Mahesh Kannamuri. And I'm delighted, we at BuzzOnEarth are delighted to have him with us. It's an absolute pleasure. And I think you'll see that as we get into this discussion, you know, I like to think of Mahesh as somebody who is in and of himself ecologically very sustainable. And you'll see, given his own approach to life, his very down-to-earth, simplistic approach to living, and his kind approach towards nature and sustainability, I think all embody the very topic that we're going to talk about today. And Mahesh is somebody unique because he has been steeped in the cradle of hard-nosed capitalism, which is Silicon Valley, where he himself has been involved in venture capital firms as a venture capital investor, successful one at that, invested money, got money back, and then decided that he wanted to come back to India. And as far back as a decade ago, Mahesh, if I recall correctly, you actually applied technology in the social impact space to create some impact, positive impact in the social sector. So from that standpoint, you clearly are a pioneer. And you know, and Mahesh's work covers a very broad swath of sectors, including obviously renewable energy, financial inclusion, microfinance, agriculture, and so on. So you know, he's been there, he's done that. He's seen the hard-nosed form of capitalism. He has taken that and embedded that into his cause, which is really all about taking that and applying it to social impact. And the other thing I should mention is that, you know, the icing on the cake, there are several layers of icing here to that cake. He also was a McKinsey consultant. And of course, he's a Harvard MBA, a graduate of Purdue, Masters. Purdue, well known for its engineering and agricultural faculty, capabilities, research, and then of course he's an IIT grad from our very own IIT Chennai, IIT Madras. So, and oh, by the way, I shouldn't forget, he's also a member of the faculty of the Art of Living Foundation. So as you can see, this guy has a very, very multidimensional approach to life, and will have a lot to share with us. So with that, welcome, Mahesh. We're delighted to have you here. Let me just start off by identifying the fact that there's a social impact venture, there's the hard-nosed startup. The social impact venture faces the very same challenges that the traditional startup faces in terms of cash, in terms of demonstrating their value in the marketplace, and so on and so forth. What would you say are the 2 or 3 additional layers of complexity and challenges that the social impact entrepreneur needs to survive and demonstrate and prove beyond what the typical hard-nosed startup, for-profit startup? By the way, Mahesh is also a for-profit social impact guy. I emphasize that, for-profit social impact investor. So Mahesh.
Thank you for your kind words, Mahesh. So just to give a little bit more color on what Mahesh told about my background. Yeah, I did come back about a decade back and trying to apply the corporate entrepreneurial principles in the social sector. And obviously, if you look at what has happened over the past decade or more, the entire for-profit social enterprises have in fact thrived. Right? 10 years back, there wasn't any social enterprise, for-profit social enterprise to be spoken of. There were a few microfinance institutions were converting from non-profit to for-profits, right? Now, obviously, as a plethora of startups, the entire ecosystem has developed very well. It's actually a fantastic opportunity in my mind for young entrepreneurs to start this journey going forward, right? Because before I want to lay in the additional risk, I want to tell what is positive, right? It's extremely positive, it's extremely bullish. And with the current pandemic that we see, I think you see a lot more momentum towards that. We'll cover, I think, hopefully that particular topic as we go along, right? So if you look at the past decade as this particular social enterprises have come through fruition, right? Some of the additional challenges that you see is clearly one thing that I see is the lack of what I call role models and success stories, right? That will attract a lot more talent and people into this particular system, right? One of the reasons why people are very fascinated about the normal tech enterprises is because all the success stories, all the entrepreneurs that they've seen, and obviously they want to emulate and create those successes. Successes have come right now in social enterprises. Clearly, microfinance institution is the leading example where you have several companies go public. Several of them have become small finance banks. One particular company has become a full-fledged bank, right? So these are role models that we need to have a lot more for you to have a lot more talent to come, right? The second piece, I guess, is what I call the weather, right? So just to take the analogy about the what is the rocket fuel, right? The space analogy that we are talking about, right? So the first was role models, right? I think just to work on that analogy, if you think about how many entrepreneurs wanted to work in the aerospace industries in the US, right? About 10 years back, 5 years back, we would have said zilch. A particular aerospace engineer would have gone to NASA, for example, right? Now with the Tesla, SpaceX kind of a role model, you see a lot more entrepreneurs that I see, right? In the LA area and the Pasadena area, right? In some of the Silicon Valley area, where a lot more people want to do the real rocket kind of companies, right? So it is that role model that has transformed the entrepreneurs. The second biggest risk, I guess, for the social entrepreneurs, what I call is the weather, right? So when you want to launch a rocket, you have to really worry about the weather. In the social entrepreneurship context, it's more around the external factors, much more than a traditional enterprise. So what are the external factors? It could be things like the regulation, for example. This is much more prone to regulation, especially when you're doing a social impact where you're working for the poor. The government does feel, rightfully so, it is their purview. So you see a lot more regulation, a lot more intervention. And we have seen that in the last decade, how some of those regulations have worked and how some of those regulations, or lack of it, have created massive failures and massive setbacks in the industry, right? So that, in fact, I would say is the weather. The third piece I would say is around the managing the field force, the distributed field force out in the rural villages trying to make an impact. Clearly, there are normal corporates who have a big field force, but here the biggest challenge is that you need to have local sourcing in the local villages and to in fact train them, skill them, and create a very common culture. It's actually very easy in my mind, or easier, to create a common culture in a particular environment, in a particular location, right? Where you have 5,000, 10,000 people, or 100 or 200 people, whatever the number is. But to think about 100, 500,000 organization which are working in the rural sector, to create a common culture is actually very difficult. And that is a very significant HR challenge as one scales that one in fact encounters. Obviously, people have solved it. They're trying to solve it going forward. And the analogy from a space perspective would be, think of a launch center, right? Which are distributed over 100 different centers. And that would be a pretty much of a big challenge, right? So those would be some of the points that I would say in terms of additional risks and additional challenges that social enterprises have.
Okay, great. And I think you touched on an important point, which is that oftentimes social impact ventures tend to be localized, right? They're trying to influence a local community. A typical social impact venture may be working with, to pick an extreme example, a tribal group that produce art or produce paintings and so on, and trying to bring them mainstream and bring them into the market economy. And in order to be able to do that, there's a restriction vis-a-vis the localization versus the scaling, and taking them global and presenting something that is investable, so to speak. But so now, how do we? The real question here, which I'm sure everybody is dying to ask, is this an inherent set of challenges that the social impact venture has to live with, and will there come a point when investors will value the fact that social impact entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs are indeed taking on a bigger challenge, and place some value on that and allow for that?
Yeah, so I would say that there are different classes of investors, right? Even in the traditional sector, right? You see some are very high risk taking investors who come in early. Some are saying that I want to come only in the later stages, take a little bit less risk. So you see many kinds of investors, and there is a class of investors who are focused on impact. And as I said, 10 years back, there was absolutely none. Most of the money was towards the philanthropic causes. But now there is a particular class of investors which are saying that I will focus on either improving the lives of the poor or making a significant dent on the environment, right? So there, and I'm seeing that particular class of investors grow. And the reason why it's growing is because obviously there are successes that have come in where they're saying that I can get my money back. It's not a pure write-off or a philanthropic cause. So you see a lot more interest. And clearly from their heart, right, they're seeing that impact on the ground as well, right? As you see more talent, as you see more successes, this in fact will keep on growing. And you see the momentum really increasing. Just to give you one more analogy, just I think I was reading statistic on e-commerce. If you look at the e-commerce penetration in the last 10 years, right, it's about 10% of apparently the entire economy. The last 2 months, there's an additional 10% of growth. So it's gone from 10% in 10 years to 20% in the last 2 months. So we are seeing a slow growth, obviously, of the social impact investors, but I'm seeing a massive surge in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, right? The tipping point is definitely.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know, and that's definitely very, very encouraging. And one of the points you made, Mahesh, remind me of the fact that there are social entrepreneurs and social impact ventures which pursue their core mission, which may be to develop an AI platform or to develop some sort of a technology application, and so on and so forth, but which, from the revenues that they generate, take a portion of those revenues and funnel them to some cause. So I kind of view that as a side-by-side venture where the core is perhaps non-social impact, if I can put it that way, but the non-social impact core helps drive a personal cause or a cause that entrepreneur may be identifying themselves with, right? So that's one scenario. The other scenario is an enterprise that embeds the cause right into the business model and integrates it right into the operating model, and they get into what we tend to call sustainable branding, in the sense that what they do is sustainable and is focused on social impact. What might be one or two examples that come to mind that started as fledgling nascent babies that have done well and evolved and grown? I can think of a couple, and once I hear from you, we can talk a little bit about that as well.
So I think there are many stories of how people have evolved, right? So the two models that you contrasted, right? Clearly, the first model, there is definitely impact, and the entire CSR movement is towards that, right? And you're seeing a lot more contribution from the CSR side, and that will continue, right? But just the specific example that you took, which is the AI in the non-core area, right? So think about AI being applied in the core area itself. So for example, I'll give an example of healthcare. Healthcare, as you know, in the pandemic is a big deal. Diagnostics is a big deal, right? So there are lots of companies that are applying AI techniques towards remote diagnostics, right? In fact, if you can send an image, right, there's a lot of analysis that happen on the back end, and in fact, you're able to give a diagnosis, whether it is your eye, whether it is your X-ray, whatever it is, right? You're able to predict what's wrong, what can be the treatment, right? So it is that particular kind of use of technology that can make a significant impact on the lives of the poor, right? And these kinds of companies are actually extremely scalable. Now, this particular company might have started with using AI perhaps for the middle class or upper middle class, right? But that technology inherently can be scaled towards the entire population, right? I am actually very fascinated and encouraged by those technological revolutions that can make a huge impact on the bottom of the pool, right? And similarly, I guess I can give you examples about water. Just to give you an example of water, right? The entire reverse osmosis thing that came in, right, was obviously for different applications. Now you're using that for all the different villages, right? Clearly, there are disadvantages, and people will argue it may not be the best solution, but it is a solution. Now I'm seeing a lot more technologies that are coming using nanotechnologies and everything, which are making it much more better to solve the drinking water problem, clean water problem in the rural, right? So you're seeing adaptation of technologies, really high-tech technologies, into making a big difference.
So from that standpoint, having technology is a must, is it?
For scalability, absolutely is a must, I think. If you want to scale and create a massive impact, I would say that technology is a must, right? It's very hard to scale without technology. You can make an impact, and most nonprofits do make an impact, perhaps in the local communities, right? And it's very hard to replace and substitute some of the impact that they're doing. I sometimes give an example of solving the issue of alcoholism, right? It is actually very difficult, and perhaps social enterprises, for-profit social enterprises, may not be able to solve it. You need to have nonprofits to do it. But technology by itself can create massive scale. That is one of the ingredients that I truly believe.
So then what's the cart and what's the horse? So in this scenario, if I am a budding, aspiring social entrepreneur, and I have a cause that's near and dear to my heart, do I have to therefore have the technology in place first if I'm indeed looking at something that's going to be scalable down the road and investable down the road? Do I have to have that technology first, or can I start with without that technology and figure out ways to bring in that technology a little further down the road?
Both options work, Mahesh, right? So I would say start, don't wait, right? If you have a passion, if you have an idea, if you're trying to make an impact, start. I think it's that people value that risk-taking ability. You cannot have all the things in lined up, right? So just start if some things, experiment, you'll change, you'll fail, right? That's fine.
So the rocket fuel here clearly is the passion and the deep desire to do good and to create some positive change and social impact. And what you're saying is, it's heartening, because what you're saying is that you as an investor and you and your peer group of investors will recognize that and will give that credit and quite possibly nurture that along the way.
Yeah. So I think that risk-taking ability is obviously far more important for anybody. So you have to be a risk taker. You have to be foolish, right, to be an entrepreneur, to be a successful entrepreneur, right? And with that gamble comes pragmatism as well, right? You need to ensure that you're serving your customers, you're making money, you're able to scale, right? All of it, it's the duality that exists, right? You're foolish at one end, you're pragmatic at the other end, right? and it's just fine balance that you do. And sometimes you'll tip on the other one side or the other. That's fine, right? But you have to keep on continuously moving.
Yeah, we at BuzzOnEarth we sit in an ecosystem that comprises of quite a few startups. Some are in the social impact space, some are not. Some are serendipitously have fallen into social impact based on what they've developed. And one of the things that typically stands out is a question that comes up: when do I pull the plug? When do I know that my cause may be fantastic, but guess what? This is not going to be scalable, and this is not going to be something that attracts investors.
Yeah. So this is a tough question for everybody, right? So both the start and the stop, right, is a tough one. Yeah. Even as investors, right? Most investors struggle with the issue about when do I pull the plug on any company that you invested in. In my experience, what you find is that, and we know that statistics say that only 1, 2, 3 out of 10 really succeed, and 6 or 7 have to let go, right? But as investors, you would actually spend a lot more time, the 6 or 7, trying to nurture them, which in fact, as a pure capitalistic perspective, is not the right thing to do, right? So it is true for entrepreneurs, true for investors, right? When to pull the plug and when to. But one advice that I would give is that if you're not gaining traction, right, be adaptive. Keep changing, keep experimenting. A lot of times we get stuck in our own ideas, in our own original thinking, and so we have to make it work, That is typically not good at all, right? Even as investors, what I've seen is that the idea that you have started versus the idea that is successful as an IP or an acquisition, right? The business models or even the idea changes 2, 3, 5, 6 times. So one of the trademarks of an entrepreneur, right, is navigating, adapting, changing to the market circumstances, right? Then only you'll be successful.
And absolutely, I think that's critical. But then the concomitant challenge that goes hand in hand with that is, do I have sufficient cash? And does my uncle and my dad and my mom and my well-wishers, my well-wishers out there, are they running out of cash, and are they losing faith in me and in my cause and in my and as you know, one of the big challenges is to constantly deal with naysayers who say you're crazy. You have a Harvard MBA. Why are you doing this? Right? Go and get an investment banking job where you can make $1 million a year. Why do you put yourself through this pain and agony? So that's always a bit of a challenge, right?
Yeah, and this is where your passion, risk-taking ability stands out. And different people have different risk-taking abilities and passions, right? So you'll have to make your own calls, right? And I've seen a wide variety of entrepreneurs.
What's the best way to fortify yourself against that? On some days, as a social entrepreneur, one wakes up and says, am I crazy? I am very despondent. This is too much. I can't handle this anymore. Right? What does one do when one looks in the mirror and feels that?
So I truly believe any entrepreneur actually is a very lonely job, right? And especially if you're a CEO. So that's very true. So my solution to that is get your equilibrium, meditate, do your pranayama, right? For me, that's my solution. I'm sure everybody else has a different solution. They can go jogging. So one thing is about ensuring that there is a little bit of de-stressing that you do every day. Right? It's actually quite stressful. There are lots of external factors that come in. There are many different variables that you deal with. Whatever de-stresses you. It could be talking to people. It could be talking to your mentors, talking to your advisors, right? Like anything that works. But recognize that it is actually a quite lonely job, right? As you said, with a lot of naysayers, because you're in fact taking a risk, you're being a pioneer, and you'll have to deal with those challenges, right? So first take care of yourself in whatever form that works for you.
Right, and I think that's excellent advice. Invest in yourself, be strong, be fortified and resilient so that you can handle everything else that gets thrown your way, right? So I think what that really says is have a good trusted circle of friends and advisors who will give you good advice, who will give you objective advice, who will tell you what you're doing right and perhaps also what you're not doing right. And one has to have the capacity to absorb that and take it in a positive way and keep going, right? So, okay, good. That's great. Now, some of the things you mentioned, Mahesh, lead directly into a paradigm shift that has been triggered by something called COVID that has hit all of us of late. And, in many ways, the coronavirus has forced many of us to recalibrate, take another look at who we are, how we are prioritizing what we do, what's important in life, what's not important in life. And in many ways, it has forced us to become more essentialist in many different ways, right? Now, how do you see sort of the pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID environment for a social impact entrepreneur? Does that rocket fuel remain the same, or does the rocket fuel need to become more unleaded or more leaded or more mixed in with kerosene or whatever? You know, what does the social entrepreneur need to think about as we go through this morphing from pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID?
Yeah. So I think the fuel remains the same. I don't think that changes. What you'll find is that in a way the weather has improved, right?
Okay.
So the external factors that were creating hurdles, in my mind, there is actually a lot of consciousness, both from people and from policymakers, right? That humanity matters, environment matters, right? That we have to take care of each other. I think the shift is there. I think we've been stuck with the whole surge of consumerism until now. That dramatic shift will sustain. Some of it will obviously go away. But for social entrepreneurs, it's a good thing. The weather improves, right? You can, in fact, take off much more often. You get a lot more rocket fuel if you want, better rocket fuel if you want, right? So I think it's actually a good sign for people to be starting social enterprises, because I think the mindset has changed. And as I said, in the last 10 years, the entire social enterprise ecosystem has developed at a particular pace. I think it's going to accelerate, just like the e-commerce has done. More importantly, I think the millennials, right, the younger generation, already have started adapting their causes. In fact, they keep on questioning why people are not being more environmentally friendly, why people are not taking care of the lives of the poor, right? Why don't we have an equitable society? You're going to see a lot more momentum and a lot more acceleration. So I would say social distancing will remain, but also social surge will happen, right? Both will happen at the same time.
That's good to know. That's good to know, and certainly hope that happens. And you know, and one also hopes, though this may not necessarily happen, one also hopes that the capital that comes in may just be just that much more patient, right? A little bit more patient. Perhaps not right now, where investors, VCs, private equity funds, and angels and others have invested in social ventures that are truly struggling because of the COVID environment right now. And I'm sure that that'll call for some very, very difficult decisions in the very short term. But one would hope that as things come back to some sort of new normal, that there will be this greater degree of consciousness, as you say, that will lay the groundwork and the landscape for a slightly longer term view, a slightly more patient outlook on social ventures, and a greater willingness to give money, not just writing grants and going to foundations and seeking.
So I think the class of social impact investors, right, or the number of them will increase, right, because of this change in people's attitudes, right. The traditional investors, I think, will remain the way they are because they're structured that way, right. But you'll see a lot more. And then what you're also seeing, by the way, with this new surge of social enterprises or success stories, the distinction between traditional investors and social investors actually are diminishing as we go along, especially for later stage companies. And I can give you where we have successful investors from the traditional sector coming, and it's actually microfinance, right? As the microfinance institutions have so much success, where they can make money, they create ROEs, you're actually seeing normal investors who would have invested in an app company or e-commerce company, right, are investing in these things. So which is actually a good thing. So in fact, the entire social impact space is getting more and more and more mainstream. Right? So that's actually good news for impact investors or impact entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs.
That's good to know. And what that sort of also says is that an entrepreneurial venture that is purely for profit will eventually have to have some element of social impact in it over time, especially now with the UN Sustainability Development Goals and environmental social governance focus and so on and so forth, and vice versa, right? On the flip side, a purely social impact venture will also have to start thinking about making some money and growing.
No, so that I think is a requirement. If you want to
Yeah,
scale, you better make money. If you
exactly.
want to have a lifestyle business, you want to have limited impact, that's fine. You can still get philanthropic money. But
Yeah.
if you want to scale, you better figure out a way to make money.
Okay. And that's where you're talking about experimental business models, right?
Keep
Keep
changing, keep
keep changing.
experimenting, keep morphing, right? Keep the impact in mind, but make sure that you make money, right? That's how you're going to scale. Otherwise, see the entire spectrum, right? Non-profits are making an impact, but they can't scale, right?
Hmm.
Governments do obviously, but it doesn't create the impact that we want. At least that's my view. I think there's a particular role. It is the social enterprise, for-profit social enterprise, for me, can create a huge amount of scale and make a difference.
What would you say are some of the key steps? What are some of the key steps that a social venture can take in order to attract investors? What might you, as a quintessential investor, look for in a social venture, in a for-profit social venture? Of course, we've talked about the technology foundation for scalability. What else would you look for in the fabric, in the tenor of a social venture team?
Yeah. So I would say that it is pretty much the same as any venture capitalist these days, right? So in addition to the technology, obviously, it's the people, right? And we already talked about the passion that they need to have to make that difference, right? You're talking about a dual objective, right? Which is making money and making an impact. So you need to somehow, in your own DNA, in the culture of the organization that you're creating, need to wear both those hats simultaneously, right? So making an impact and making money at the same time. So I think it's a very new set of entrepreneurs, different breed of entrepreneurs that you will see, right? And clearly, not everybody is for that, but you're seeing a lot more talent coming in. So people, as we know, is very important. They should be able to change their business models, keep experimenting, navigating, right? They should be good salespeople. They should be good inspirers, motivators. Everything that you'll see in an entrepreneur holds true here as well, right? And obviously, you're going to be cognizant of the additional risks that these particular social enterprises face as you go along.
Right, and it's heartening to see that there are very, very smart, very competent, extremely talented people, very well qualified people who are jumping into the space more and more and more. And as you say, it's becoming mainstream.
Right.
So there's obviously something there. And pardon the analogy that I draw here, but there's something very sustainable here as well. And it seems to me that it's here to stay, and it's going to be around forever as we go forward, and especially so post-COVID, where people have kind of woken up and who've seen peacocks and rhinos on main streets, and who started wondering what is
Clean
all this
air and
about.
beautiful rivers and lakes, right?
Exactly, absolutely. Now, what, Mahesh, would you say are some of the most successful spaces that social ventures have succeeded in? There are different types of models, right? There are different types of models. You can have a service model, you can have a product model, you can have a model where as a social entrepreneur, I might want to help some of the social impact venture by helping them find the right people, or helping them market themselves better, or help them with their branding. What are some of the specific slivers that might exist out there for me, a budding social entrepreneur?
Yeah. So the way I would say is that the space is wide open, right? You figure out a way to carve out your niche. I don't think there is a particular, if you look at the horizontal value chain, right, a particular place where it's good or bad. It's just the momentum of this particular sector is going to carry people through, right? Obviously, there are some sectors post-COVID which are going to get affected, like everybody, right? So, for example, if you're trying to, there are some social enterprises who are saying that I want to do this tourism for people in the villages or something, right? So that travel industry, we know is going to get affected, or hospitality, right? So figure out, ensure that you're not working in those sectors, but that's going to be true for normal sectors also, right? So clearly healthcare is going to be focus on that, education, right? Agri is another big deal, right? That's going to come, manufacturing, local sourcing, clean energy, as we talked about, clean water. So there are multiple sectors, but in the horizontal value chain that you talked about, right? I think everything's up and open.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good to know. That's good to know. Now, from a funding perspective, in terms of getting some liquidity and getting some cash, Needless to say, the current environment has made things that much more challenging. But assuming that somehow we come back to some form of normalcy, what would you say might be some viable sources of funding for a startup, for a social impact enterprise, beyond the traditional, my uncle, my dad, my sister, friends and family, and then perhaps also some friendly angels? Some of the things that come to mind are maybe crowdfunding, um, or maybe some other ways of galvanizing a like-minded group of people to create a pool of funds. I mean, what are some of the alternatives here that people could consider and think about before getting into that pre-series, pre-series A, hard-nosed VC, pre-series A, B, and further down the road?
So apart from friends and family, crowdsourcing, your own savings, right? Passion. So I think what I've seen, obviously those things are important, right? But I get back to the revenue models, right? Even in the early stages, are there ways that you can in fact start earning money, right? Small amounts, you may lose money a little bit. Um, uh, that actually helps you prove your business model, right? And see what the customer wants. So that I think people somehow don't focus as much early days, especially if they have a lot of money, right?
Mm.
They in fact try to uh, spend it all. So I think in terms of the financing and taking the rocket fuel analogy, right? It's actually both the extremes are bad. It's too little fuel or too much fuel. Both are bad actually, right? So if we have obviously too little fuel, the rocket won't take off. Too much fuel, perhaps the weight is too much, or it could explode, whatever it is, right? It is figuring out the right optimal amount of money, right? But at the same time, trying to regenerate the fuel, if you will, as you go along, right? Can
Mm.
in fact take you along, right? It's so obviously with the amount of cash that you have, if you're not earning revenues, you can only go so far. But if you want to go to the next orbit, if you can regenerate, right, the fuel itself through revenue models, then you can go to the next orbit.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good. And now, everybody keeps talking about business models, right? And a business plan. And I always used to say, if somebody asked me this question, I always used to say, uh, show God a business plan if you want to make him laugh, right? Because it's full of assumptions and it's full of projections and it's full of forecasts and it's a wish list. Now, from your perspective, Mahesh, what would you say are the key elements of a solid business plan that you might want to see? What are the elements, characteristics of a solid business plan that you would look at and say, okay, there's something here that
So I think there are
not
enough. Perfect. So there are lots of business model frameworks out there, right? I think anybody can pick up that. But as you rightly pointed out, the very early stages, those are just guideposts, right? It's not cast in stone by any stretch of the imagination. As I said, anybody who started at the early stages, by the time they're successful, the business models have gone through 6 or 7 iterations, right? So that's not the real guiding factor. But I think what that helps an investor is to analyze or help understand the entrepreneur better, right? It's
Mhm.
all about the entrepreneur at the end of the day, especially in the very early stages
Mhm.
where you perhaps have an idea, you have some technology, some traction, right?
Mhm.
It's your ability to scale, ability to navigate, ability to adapt, ability for you to see the customer connect, ability to see how hard nosed you are, right? Ability to see how you can earn money. All of those things encapsulated in the business plan presentation that you are making, either to your friends, family, or to your investors, right? The passion also comes through in the business plan. So it is all of those things. Assessment is very important for an investor or even for employees or co-founders to join that particular.
Okay, so essentially, it is what we keep hearing, which is fail fast forward, right? So keep learning quickly as you go, and failing is not necessarily negative in this context, but it's all about learning, adjust, tweak, keep going forward, and keep chiseling away at the business plan so that you are starting to feel more and more and more comfortable with whatever it is you're trying to do, and feel that it is taking you in the right direction. And it's got to be done with feedback from a trusted board of advisors and from a trusted group of
Yeah.
people who really have been there and done that, who understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And I think on the people dimension, right, ensure that you have very good co-founders or your early employees are very good, because the early stages shape the company. And I've seen many cases where that's a huge determinant to success, right? So as an entrepreneur, your ability to work with people, inspire them, assess people also is very, very important, right? If you yourself don't have that ability, ensure you have a co-founder who has that ability as well, right?
Hmm.
I think the people dimension is extremely, extremely important. And with this COVID times where you're going to have remote workings, right?
Hmm.
It becomes even more challenging and even more important on the people dimension.
Okay, good, good. I think we're at about 11:45. We have 15 minutes or so left in this cloud chat, and at this stage, I'm going to open it up to our very esteemed audience that's out there. And I see that there are a couple of questions that have already come in, and I'm going to start with one that comes from somebody I know well, who is in the northern part of India and who has started a very successful, eco-friendly um, uh, food business, and she's actually set up some online capabilities as well. And whatever she sells is highly sustainable and eco-friendly and natural. And so the question from her specifically is around the following, Mahesh, and we may have touched on it a little bit, but I think it's worth probing into just a little bit further. We all understand that technology is essential for scaling, for purposes of scaling. Should we be creating our own technology, developing our own technology, or should we be outsourcing those capabilities, partnering with others in order to develop that technology?
So I would say that there are lots and lots of technologies available that you can get. Open source, for example, is something that you can easily get, right? And so for that particular example that you're talking about, there's enough low-cost SaaS model technologies that that particular entrepreneur can easily use for various aspects of the business, right? They should grab onto that and use it. Right? Going back to, for example, the AI example that you talked about, AI in healthcare, right? I don't think you need to be an AI scientist to really develop the technology. There's enough technologies, Google and everybody else is that's uh, giving, right? That you can take it and repurpose this for your own application, right? So the availability of technology actually is quite abundant. It's just repurposing of it is very important to create successful companies. There will be some technologies where you are an innovator. Clearly, that's very welcome. So, for example, I know of an innovator who uses nanotechnology for water purification, right? So this particular entrepreneur has got worldwide patents and everything else, and hopefully he's going to be successful going forward. But not all of us in the same boat. You can repurpose, reuse existing technologies, then still create a massive.
So how does one go about um, potentially, discovering those technologies or discovering where to get those technologies, how to find those technologies? Is it through networking? Is it by attending technology events? What are some of the practical ways of going about doing that?
I think there's enough materials available out there. For example, if this particular entrepreneur is completely technology agnostic, right, or they're not done any technology before, right, work with somebody who's in the technology domain, right? Or let's say, for example, this particular entrepreneur wants to create marketing campaigns, right? There are enough SaaS-based marketing campaign companies out there. You can just subscribe to one of them and just launch it, right? If, for example, this particular person wants to create an inventory management system, right? Enough companies out there. So it depends upon the need that are out there. And if you just do a simple Google search, there'll be a bunch of lots of out there. Obviously, you got to figure out which one is applicable for you. And if somebody has done this before, it's easy for you to select it, right? You don't have to go through that mental agony to figure out whether this particular company is right for you.
So it's a matter of some due diligence. It is a matter of doing some research and really reaching out to on an experimental basis a variety of people who might be out there delivering these services and trying to understand who's best.
Yes.
for that specific need, right? And I would assume, therefore, that it's typically quicker to go outside for this sort of thing rather than developing it in-house. And would you say it's more cost efficient as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Much more faster to market. And some of these things, there's no core IP behind this, right? Marketing campaign software or inventory, there's no core IP, right? Now, if you're developing, let's say, on the eco-friendly company, right? So I'm not talking about digital technology. Let's say you come up with a new additive, right? Or a new fertilizer, right? Or a new seed or whatever it is, right? There is IP behind that. If you don't have IP, if you're creating supply chain logistics, bringing the producers and the customers together, right? Then there's enough technologies out there they should take.
Okay, good. So hopefully that has at least partially answered that question. I saw another question here that we may have addressed somewhat, but and you know, it really comes back down to what are some of the core sectors where technology can be applied to solve a social problem. I think we talked about healthcare. Education seems to be another one.
Absolutely. Education,
right?
financial services, agriculture.
Post-COVID.
Yeah. No, the many sectors: education, healthcare, agriculture, financial services, right? Many different areas that you can do. Obviously, clean energy, right? So, by the way, when I say technology, it's not digital technologies alone. There are many other technologies that are out there, right? So, there is, for example, I call the material science technology, the nanotechnologies, and all that chemistries, the new chemistries that are coming up. There are multidisciplinary technologies. We can think about drones and robots and stuff like that. On the healthcare side, there's biogenetics that are coming up, right? There are vast field. Obviously, we know about digital technologies, but there are many other technologies that are out there that can create the impact on the social side.
Okay, and you know, one of the things that I run into often when I was in the corporate sector, and I'm no longer in the corporate sector, but I now have the reverse perspective. So now I am in a situation where I am reaching out to large corporates in a variety of different capacities to really understand their sustainability missions, what they're trying to do, how they would like to increase their impact. Many of them spend millions and millions and millions of dollars, and unfortunately, that is not known, and it has not reached you and me in a very personal sense. It has not reached us through social media, for example. How does a social entrepreneur appeal to that large corporate? You know, and it may be through the CSR side as well, where the funds tend to be very project oriented, right? So with a hard opening, hard close, this is how much money we have, this is the project we'll fund, versus approaching a large corporate from the perspective of you have a marketing budget, or you have some monies to drive a particular sustainable development goal that you're going after. You know, it may be CO2 emissions, it may be clean water, it may be health, it may be child education, whatever. How do you think it would be best for an aspiring entrepreneur to approach one of these large corporates, to tap into that source as a possibility beyond angels and perhaps even before going to a VC?
Yeah, no, I think so. Just that particular dimension, right? So I've seen many of the companies that I work with have approached corporates, and they have taken the CSR money and implemented an impact, right? So, for example, just to give you talked about the clean water, right? So there are companies who say that if you're, let's say, a particular company has a manufacturing facility in a particular remote location, and they want to do clean water in the entire surrounding villages to ensure that their employees are safe, healthy. So they in fact go and say that we'll set up entire plant out there, right? So these are project-based stuff, as you said, that can create additional revenues. And for some of the companies, actually significant. I've seen 20-25% of the revenues come from these CSR projects, right? So which is still significant where you're taking project-based stuff. So I think that's definitely a viable alternative. What I want, obviously, the corporates to do is there a mechanism for them to come in early and fund some of the scalable propositions as well, right? So, for example, in the traditional corporate world, you have seen this corporate venture capital groups, right, where they invest specifically in companies in their synergistic sectors, right? So, for example, a retail company might invest in companies that are focusing on increasing traffic or creating more additional databases, whatever it is, so AI algorithms, right? So I want more of these corporates to invest in companies directly, which will help their mission or which will help their goals.
Okay, okay. And we have another question, Mahesh, from a gentleman who is in the food business, but in a slightly different context. He is in the he's in the gourmet food restaurant business and is trying to create a venture in that space. But the question specifically is, how does one go about finding investors that are specific to an entrepreneur's particular area of focus? So it could be technology, it could be the food industry, it could be, how does one go about looking for such investors?
The easiest way is to obviously look at all the different funds out there and see the kind of investments and the thesis that they have, right? So it'll be very apparent in terms of the kinds of investments they have done. So obviously you can do that research. Then there's networks that you can have. And if you're a complete pioneer, then I think it becomes difficult, right? If a completely new area, it obviously becomes difficult. But I think just existing websites will give you enough information on what they are wanting to do.
Okay, so again, it's relatively easy to do that. I mean, just go on the web and
so go on the web, they'll give you a lot of investment, but I think network a lot, right? So you'll find lots and lots of people that you'll discover in these conferences, webinars, through mentors, right? That may not be very apparent on the web itself, but especially the early stages, the angels, the seed funds, right? It's your networks that matter most there.
Okay. Okay, good. We have about 3-4 minutes left.
So I want to just say a poem towards the end, actually.
Please.
Is it the right time?
Sure.
Okay, so I just, based upon whatever discussions that we are saying, right, I just wrote a very short poem, right? And trying to integrate our cloud chat and cloud theme here, right? So here it goes. If you want to touch the clouds, you don't need a rocket. Right? If you want to touch the clouds, you don't need a rocket. A drone is actually far more perfect. Right? Start small, you can make a lot more progress, right? Second thing, right? If the clouds are gathering, it's not doom and gloom. You feel that the clouds are gathering, it's not doom or gloom. A rain ushers a new bloom. There'll be lots of new opportunities for us to go forward, especially the post-COVID world, right? If you're a bit foggy or cloudy, or looking for a push or a pat, if you are a bit foggy or cloudy, or looking for a push or a pat, come and connect on Cloud Chat.
I love it. I love it. and come and collect on a Cloud Chat and
connect on a Cloud Chat. Yes.
Connect on a Cloud Chat and create a lot of buzz.
You get a lot of buzz. Right?
Buzz on Earth, right? That's great. Thank you so much, Mahesh. Really appreciate your thoughts, your insights, your guidance. We certainly hope that we were at least able to scratch the surface in many of the questions and the guidance that our participants were seeking. And needless to say that this is going to be the first chat in a series of chats in this session. And certainly at some point we look forward to having you back.
It will
be my pleasure. Yes.
Talk to us some more.
Just one sec, Mahesh. We have to, give a chance to speak. There is one gentleman who wants to ask a question, and he wants to ask that over a video.
Okay, I saw that. I wasn't quite sure how to pull that off technologically. So why don't you do that?
Mahesh, you have you're the host right now.
Who is this person?
If you make me the host, I can do that.
Okay, let me try to do that.
Mahesh, why don't you make Gayatri the host?
You're a panelist, right? Okay, you're the host, Gayatri.
Okay, great. In the meantime, Mr. Krishnamurthy, you can ask 1 or 2 questions more which have been posted.
Yeah,
see the
yeah,
Q&A. Yeah.
I'll do that. So one of the questions that has come forward, Mahesh, is what percentage of investors are in the impact sector these days compared to the regular non-impact space?
Small fraction, I would put about 10% perhaps, right? Growing.
Okay.
I think it's just the 10% analogy I gave for e-commerce, right? I think holds true here as well, but the growth is there.
So 10% in terms of value and in terms of volume, or would you say that the value may be greater than what the 10% represents
No, I think in terms of dollar value, right?
in terms of
10%
dollar
also
value?
maybe the higher end, I would say. So it'll be definitely lower. But in the later stages now, you're seeing a lot more. So just take, for example, if it depends on the classification as well. Let's take solar as an example. It is clearly an impact organization, right? Where you have traditional and the impact investors come and blend together. So if you take all of those things, then obviously it'll be a larger portion.
And is that portion growing in India?
Yes, absolutely. And last 10 years, clearly it's growing. And you'll see a lot more growth.
And it will continue to grow. That's very encouraging. Absolutely. Okay, great. Gayatri, go ahead if you're ready to open this up to the...
Yeah, Mr. Patanjali Jha, you had a question.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm also technology blind, and I'm Principal Chief Commissioner in Bangalore, and also happen to be a natural farmer.
Welcome, Mr. Patanjali Jha. Welcome. I've heard a lot about you, a lot of wonderful things about you, and it's a pleasure and delight to at least hear your voice, and we'll get to meet sometime soon, I'm sure.
And it's amazing to listen to you both. Part of this was answered, which I had in mind. But since I follow Fukuoka, who is a Zen master, so materialism is what is finishing this world. This is my firm belief. So I am not so much on the visible part of the profit, which this idea has, which the world is not aware of, or even if it is aware of, it's not formalized. So my solution and this thing, what I was looking for, unfortunately, I still have 14 months to go in the government. Once I hang my boot, full time. But already about 6,000 acres of farmers who are with us, small, medium, large, educated, not so educated, and which is far more productive, which is full of environmental benefits. And if this idea can be taken to a good corporate, this is what my vision is. I can be completely wrong. Because if the likes of the Amazon and the likes of, I saw new entrepreneurs also getting into the social enterprise for the environment. Here is an environmental idea which has money, a great amount of money, but it is stupid. Why reinvent the wheel? Go to the likes of Tata's, go to the likes of Wipro, go to the likes of those who have established credentials with good corporate governance, with good values, and make them to take this. And to the consumers, say this: if you want to have more forests, better resources for the next generation, let's buy this. Each one of them has 1 lakh, employees, 2 lakh employees. One corporate can, run with this idea. In brief, this idea is this: that this is basically multi-layer permanent food forest where the temperature is, in the year 1 comes down by 2 degrees, regenerates the underground water, saves the river system, saves the soil. One of my batchmates from Delhi School of Economics, he put me through some. I'm growing old, so I forget the names. It's apparently world's biggest, environment NGO. So there is one gentleman who talks of water. There is one gentleman who talks of soil. One talks of air. I mean, I find it too funny. I mean, they all are integrated. So, coming back to the question, why should an Amazon not support this idea with the natural produce being sold here? If you buy produce from there, you would generate more forests. The likes of Sant Sichawal is with us. We are the social heroes. So we have no dearth of, the idea is perfect. It is good for India, it is good for California, it's good for Africa, it's good for Australia, everywhere.
So, Mr. Jada, thank you for the question, and I think it's very, very fundamental to the ecosystem that we are in right now and the silo-driven environment that we face. Mahesh, any thoughts on this? I mean, it's you've been involved in this space. You've been involved in water rejuvenation and agri and so on.
There's no time left. That is the point.
What's that, sorry?
There's not much time left, to make someone make another million, billion fail or this thing. We cannot afford it. We have to have someone who already is in, with the right corporate value. I was speaking to one of my ex-colleagues. He retired as a managing partner of Deloitte in India. I said, sir, it will be a crime in case you don't make any of these, listen to this idea and make them to implement it. Why would they not do it? Where is the profit of this kind?
So I think, obviously this particular venture that you're talking about, which has got a multi-dimensional approach towards agriculture, right? This is the agriculture space, right?
Yeah, agriculture for environment, which is far more productive, no cost.
Perfect. Perfect.
It is at the cost of various industries. Let me warn you that.
Great. So as I think
pharma is not needed. None of it is needed. The pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, chemical fertilizer, none of it is needed.
So I think this is an idea that people should listen to, obviously, right? So I think you should package it, perhaps market it, send it to a few of the people that you know, and ensure that obviously whatever you're doing makes economic sense, right? At the end of the day,
because it is far more productive.
Perfect.
This is also very high, and the invisible is just mind blowing. So there are so many. I listen to the corporates. They talk of sustainable development. They talk humbug. I have friends in McKinsey's. What rubbish, yeah? This is regenerative. An ex-colleague has joined Bill Gates Foundation. I say, yeah, trees are the basic thing everybody is talking about. Why you're not doing anything about it? Nothing.
No, I think it's very valid. The point you raise is valid, and we truly relate, Mr. Patanjali, to the passion that you demonstrate and that you exhibit. And in fact, the good news is that well, there's bad news. Bad news is we've run out of time. Good news is that I have a few seconds to dovetail into what Mr. Patanjali just said, which is that we've got several other series that are lined up at BuzzOnEarth, several other cloud chats, and one of these is going to, in fact, involve Mr. Patanjali himself along with the Indian Territorial Army, the Eco Army, which performs a yeoman service to the nation by bringing in their project management skills, their discipline, their structure in executing and getting things done vis-a-vis water restoration and afforestation and all these things. So that's the good news, and we very much look forward to curating that series as well. And Mr. Patanjali, very much looking forward to having you on that, needless to say. In addition to that series, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a couple of more cloud chat sessions that are lined up. One is going to be about wellness, and it's going to be about animals. There's a growing population of animal lovers, and it's going to focus on wellness, not just for human beings, but also for animals. And we'll have some outstanding speakers in that series as well. And we've got a whole bunch of other things. We're going to be curating a business plan competition where we'll have social impact ventures come in and present their business plans. And Kanumuri Garu, we definitely expect you to be there and we'll bring in some VCs, we'll bring in some PE funds depending on the stage that those startups are in, and we'll evaluate them and figure out how to give them the rocket fuel that they need. So we've got a whole bunch of these lined up. Branding, sustainability branding as well, marketing, sustainability branding. We've got some seriously heavyweight stalwarts out there like Jagdish Sheth from Emory University and so on, who will come in and share their much more than 2 cents worth on these discussions. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to also apologize for 1 or 2 lingering questions for which we will not have time on this cloud chat. But one of the things we will do is we'll loop back with those who've raised these questions, and hopefully we'll be able to close the loop on that. And that's about it, I guess, from my side. thank you all so much for participating, and we really appreciate it. And we very much look forward to seeing you all on our next Cloud Chat.
Thank you so much, Mahesh. Let the buzz go on BuzzOnEarth. Thank you.
And thanks for your wonderful poem, by the way. Very inspiring as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.